What you see right here behind me is my YouTube content creation setup desk. It is what I've been using for about 150 videos plus over the last 1.5 years for all things from remote podcast recording as well as YouTube videos, of course, and live streaming. There are a couple of very interesting things built in here, like the secondary monitor for my MacBook, the ATEM Mini Pro ISO that I've been using for things like recording for some of the time, and of course also the Atomos Ninja Vs that I've been using right there for recording with the Canon EOS R, which can record for longer than 30 minutes. Now first up, of course, we have the cameras. There's a Canon EOS R right there, and up there's the Canon EOS R5C right in the teleprompter, but more about the teleprompter in a moment. This camera right here has the 24 to 105mm lens on it, and this camera is kind of the over-the-shoulder shot that I kind of precision however I need it. Sometimes it's this over-shoulder shot, but sometimes I also have it right next to the other camera just to have a slightly offset angle, sometimes also a little bit lower or pointing at the desk depending on what I'm showing and doing in the video. Now the other camera that I have right there is the main camera right now, the Canon EOS R5C, and in the teleprompter it is with the 35mm f1.8 lens set to an aperture of 2.8. This gives me a nice shallow depth of field, so the background here is nicely blurred, but at the same time it's also not all too much of a close-up like a 50mm would. I also can now use this 35mm lens in this setting because this camera has a full-frame 4K capable sensor, which the Canon EOS Rs don't have, and that has always been one of my limitations I had to work with when wanting to go for 4K. Now this main camera is also set inside of a teleprompter. This is the Leeventi teleprompter, which is super incredible because it is lightweight, easy to set up, and it works really, really well in this type of setup. Now, the reason why I have this is not necessarily to read all the scripts or something of that sort. However, I also noticed that that is actually something really valuable, and I'm considering doing that more often. But the main reason I actually got this teleprompter was to actually put a monitor in there, which then also can show the video or the camera monitor basically, so that I can see what the camera is looking at. And I basically don't have to switch over to kind of looking off to the side to seeing the side monitor, and instead I would be able to just look into the lens and straight away see exactly what the camera sees without it looking kind of weird. Now, with the addition of the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, I actually also was able to then have a multi-view up there so that I can actually switch with a button on the ATEM Mini to see other different cameras or all the different cameras at the same time, which has also been a really interesting feature. Another really cool benefit of a teleprompter like this with a monitor in it is also that you can actually hook that up to your computer, and that means you can also do, for example, a Skype call where you literally look into the person's eyes because they are literally behind the monitor through the teleprompter. This is something that I covered in a specific video, so if you want to check that out, you can of course find a link down in the description below. That will be linked up there, or also I think here in the corner I will put it also. Now the third camera, of course, is the one that I'm talking into right now, and depending on the needs, it's either a overhead shot or it's another over-the-shoulder shot, or it might be just another angle, which can be helpful as well. Oftentimes, however, it also comes into play that I have 3 cameras now because sometimes I want to talk about a certain camera or I want to talk about a lens or stuff like that, and then I also want to have a camera in my hands, and having multiple bodies makes that possible as well. Maybe another important aspect is that I absolutely love having permanent power on my cameras. Now the Canon EOS R5C, which is in the teleprompter, has a easy going with that because it already supports, or finally supports, the power delivery via USB-C. Now that is something that the Canon EOS R right there, as well as the one that I'm talking into right now, do not support, and there I actually used the dummy batteries. Now, some of you might know I actually had an encounter with too much voltage or too much amperage, I'm not sure exactly, with one of my Canon EOS R cameras, and I had to get it fixed. So if you are using dummy batteries, please make absolutely certain that you are using the right one with the right voltage, the right adapters and everything, that your camera does not get fried, because that is a very expensive experiment. Now, however, with the newer cameras like the R5 and the R5C, as well as the R3, I think, those are, of course, going to be able to do power delivery via USB-C, and that's a much safer choice. So I would absolutely prefer to do that with all the cameras instead of using dummy batteries. But as we have it, I use the dummy batteries. They work great if you plug them in correctly and all of those things, and they have been a godsend because I absolutely do not want to miss a shot because of an empty battery. Now next we have two Atomos Ninja V recorders and monitors. These are really incredible because with the Canon EOS R cameras, I do not have the ability to record for longer than 30 minutes. Now with these, I can actually record for longer than 30 minutes. These can record in ProRes, which is really easy to work with on macOS, and they have great monitors which make it possible to monitor the camera angles as well as, of course, colors, light, and all of those things with the different abilities of the monitors that are built in there. Now, I have a couple of videos about the Atomos Ninja V monitors, and I still believe that they are probably the best on the market in this specific field of capable recorders which record in ProRes and DNxHR as well as now H.265, and they also are incredible monitors which are bright, which can be powered with the Sony batteries as well as a power outlet and much more. The storage that they use is SSDs, which is also really easy to come by and comparatively inexpensive if you compare it to CF Express cards or SD cards. These two monitors have been absolutely incredible. I basically hooked up the Canon EOS R cameras to these monitors so that I can hit record on these monitors, and then I have a out signal sent from these monitors to the next device, which is the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. This device essentially is a live switcher for HDMI signals, which can either be used as a USB-C webcam with, for example, a MacBook or Windows computer, or you can actually also directly live stream from this box to the internet via an Ethernet cable and an RTMP stream. Now, this device specifically supports up to 4 HDMI inputs, 2 audio inputs. However, that can also be split to 4 mono audio inputs, so 2 stereo or 4 mono audio inputs. The USB-C port can also be used to hook up a SSD, and then you can record all 4 inputs plus the mixed output that you create, and that is incredibly powerful. The only thing is that this device only has one USB-C port, so if you want to use this as a webcam and record at the same time, you're basically out of luck because that's something that this device cannot do. However, the next upgraded version of this, the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO, that can actually do that, and that would have been my next upgrade if I were to stick with this setup. Now, the reason why at some point I actually went away from the switching or the live recording via the ATEM Mini Pro ISO is because this device only records in full HD, and I wanted to fully switch to 4K, and of course by doing so this was no longer a possibility to just actually record in the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. So that's why I got the second Atomos Ninja V, so I can record both of these cameras, the EOS R cameras, in there, and then also record the third signal in the Canon EOS R5C, which of course does not have a 30-minute record time limit. Now, I absolutely love the ATEM Mini Pro ISO and also the other models in this lineup, the ATEM Mini as well as the ATEM Mini Pro. Those have similar capabilities to this, but of course they all are missing something. Like, for example, the Pro can record one output but not multiples, so the ISO can record all 4 plus the output. The Pro can also record the output and it mixes everything and it can stream. The Mini can just mix between these things and be used as a HDMI, a webcam for your computer, or can be used as just a HDMI mixer and then output to a monitor. And again, this device is incredible. It can do so much if you are producing a live show, if you're doing podcast recordings and stuff like that. This here is really powerful because it's offloading a lot of the work that normally your computer has to do in terms of encoding multiple camera angles, putting them together and all of that. Here, you can actually put all of those things into hardware so that this is doing all that work for you. It is kind of like OBS in a box. However, it is of course also has its limitations, but I actually came to love this because it has a lot of features that are otherwise hard to come by with just your computer or just your cameras. One thing that I, for example, am doing now here in this specific setup is that the computer is also one of the inputs of this device. And the reason why I'm doing this is that way I can actually choose the computer to show up there in the teleprompter really easily, and I can switch between the different camera angles. I can show just those on the teleprompter up there, and then I can also go in and have this multi-view which shows basically all of the camera angles and the status of the hard drive and those kind of things, so that I can manage everything whilst looking into the teleprompter. And like I said, I can use it as a teleprompter because I can switch to just the monitor, and I can also use it to check my angles for the cameras and stuff like that. So this is really comfortable to make adjustments like this and basically use it for all kinds of different things in a live streaming or YouTube Studio setup. Now the camera signals are actually coming in here after they have been already recorded from the Atomos Ninja Vs. So that's being done before they're going in here, and then from here I have one signal going to the monitor, and of course I have a webcam signal going to the computer if I'm not using the record functionality of the Pro ISO. Now with that, this basically wraps up the full setup in terms of the video capabilities. But in terms of audio, I've actually been using the Oktava 012, and that is a great overhead microphone. This is with the hypercardioid capsule, and that signal is then being processed by the Zoom F6, which is a 32-bit audio recorder, which I actually absolutely adore because it has the dual AD converters, which means it has basically no clipping, but that also comes into play with the Oktava because that also has a really nice high SPL level, so I don't really have to worry about screaming into this microphone. It will be picked up nice and clear, and then the Zoom F6 will also manage to pick it up, record it to the SD card, and basically give me a file that I can do whatever I want with, and I don't have to really worry about any of the distortions or stuff like that. The cool thing about that is also, again, it is able to be powered continuously via USB-C power delivery, and I am also able to send the signal from there right into my computer via an audio interface mode, which gives me the option to also use this whole setup for live streaming, because that basically means that I can send the audio signal from my computer straight to the Zoom F6. There I can hook up my headphones and listen to that whilst I'm at the same time also audio monitoring myself on the same headset, and then I can send the audio signal from the microphone that is overhead here, or I can plug in another microphone and use that as an additional microphone for this whole setup and send that back to my computer as, for example, an input for Skype or Zoom or something like that, for the remote conferencing or the remote podcasting with something like, for example, Zencaster or Riverside.fm. Now, another thing that I'm doing in terms of audio pipelining is actually that I am also sending the audio signal from the Zoom F6 to the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. This was actually something that more or less was replaced once I did the recording the way that I'm doing it now with the Atomos Ninja Vs. But at the time when I was using the ATEM Mini Pro ISO for the recording of all the video feeds, sending the audio from the F6 to this device also gave me a backup. So if I forget to hit record on the F6, I will still have an audio recording on the ATEM Mini Pro ISO in the WAV format. Not 32-bit float, but at least I still have something to work with. Now, one thing you might wonder is, how do you keep all of this in sync? There are 3 cameras, 2 Atomos Ninja Vs, and the Zoom F6, and all of those have different times running all the time. And of course, if you hit record, you can never record on all at the exact same time. That way, it's just always going to be somewhat out of sync. Now, one thing that I can do here is actually kind of link together a whole bunch of cables to get a timecode signal from one of these devices to all of them. Now, specifically, if you want to learn about timecode and how that works, I will have a video about that linked up here. I have talked about this in the past, and I actually have a whole playlist of videos about this topic, different devices, as well as workflows in Premiere Pro, as well as DaVinci Resolve. But the basic solution is called timecode, which makes it so that all of these are recording at least a timestamp into the video files that you can later on work with and synchronize things to. A device like the Zoom F6, for example, the audio recorder that I'm using, that can actually also output a timecode signal, which is an audio signal, which you then can actually connect to your cameras and basically record into your camera so that you don't have to worry about those things, and you could just synchronize those things in DaVinci Resolve or with a tool called Tentacle Sync Studio. Now, something that I've been using in the setup that I have here are the Tentacle Sync E's as well as the Track E audio recorders. Now, these devices right here are timecode generators, and they basically make it so that I don't have to have cables running everywhere to get the timecode to the different cameras. One of these Tentacle Sync E's, for example, is currently connected to the camera that I'm talking into, and there I have a timecode signal recorded into the audio track. And then I have an audio recorder that I have right here in my pocket. This is the Track E, and that also is synchronized via timecode. The way that I do it in this setup specifically, if I'm not live streaming and I'm doing a recording, is basically that I connect this to the R5C in the beginning, that it takes the timecode from this and basically remembers it and is just going to continuously use that. That's the benefit of a cinema-grade camera, because it can actually just be synchronized once and then it runs on its own. The same thing I can do with the Zoom F6. I can basically hook that up and then it is going to run and continuously use the Sync E timecode that is synchronized to it. And then I can use these little devices and connect them to the two other cameras, the Canon EOS Rs, and those are going to send that microphone signal to the Atomos Ninja V, and it's recorded in there so that everything in the end has a timecode signal attached to it or in the audio waveform. And then later on in the studio or in the editing process, I can bring all of that together in Tentacle Sync Studio, or if you want in DaVinci Resolve, you can also synchronize those types of timecodes together, and you have a nicely laid out timeline with everything nicely in sync, and you don't have to do any clap syncing whatsoever. I, however, still do the clap sync most of the time just to be safe in case of any of these devices has no timecode, if that ever happens to be the case. And that's basically how I set up my YouTube studio. It has been great for the production of over 150 videos, and it has served me very well. Now, of course, be aware that not everything that I have talked about in this video was there right from the beginning. I didn't start with 3 cameras, I didn't start with 2 Atomos Ninja Vs, I didn't start with the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. All of that kind of grew over time, and I actually even step-stoned the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, for example. I used the ATEM Mini first and then went to the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. However, over time, I would say I perfected it to a certain extent. Another thing that I want you to be aware of is that I would not necessarily buy the exact same gear if I were to start out. I thought that this video is mostly a description of what has come together for my setup, how I've been using it, and all of that. However, if I were to completely from scratch create a YouTube studio, I would probably make some different choices. So take this as inspiration for some parts of your setup. Maybe some things make sense for you to look into. And with all that said, I hope you have an amazing day, create your YouTube studio to your liking, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao!